is this pretty dead set on? This must be a very difficult group of people to poll. Most of the polls are saying precisely the same thing, that this is Liz Truss is for the losing, that she's got an enormous lead. But how can that be the case when we don't even know how many Tory party members there are?
Morning, Tom. Right, so I mean, look, nothing in the universe is ever 100%, right? Like, we always do have to build in some level of uncertainty. The bookies put it at roughly a 5% chance that Rishi Sunak's going to win. That feels roughly right to me. So, you know, 1 in every 20 universes we'll see Liz Truss not winning this contest. And the reason that we're so confident that Liz Truss is going to go on to win is because all of the opinion polls so far, from lots of different pollsters using lots of different approaches, have all shown, a comfortable lead for Liz Truss. Our final opinion poll of the race put it at 61% Liz Truss, 39% Rishi Sunak. Now, there are reasons to believe that opinion polling of Conservative Party members is a lot more difficult. We don't know how many there are. Like you just said, we don't know sort of their demographic profile, unlike the population as a whole. A lot of them are very old and therefore less likely to be taking part in online opinion polls. But despite all of those facts, the fact that in all of the polls we've got, the gap is so large, still means that we're fairly confident that Liz Truss is going to go on to win.
And assuming that does happen, looking at all of the myriad issues that the country faces, it's going to be a very tough first week next week. Assuming Liz Truss wins, she'll be through the door of Downing Street probably quite late on Tuesday, and immediately we'll have to appoint a cabinet and start tackling some of these big issues. Would you expect that a new Prime Minister would get a bit of a honeymoon period, potentially a bounce in the polls?
Yeah, so it's worth noting that this sort of transition for Liz Truss is going to be very different to what Boris Johnson went through in 2019, because Boris Johnson spent the whole of the 2019 Conservative leadership election appealing to Conservative Party members by pointing out that he was the best man to get Brexit done. Then, a few months later, he went to the country and he convinced them that he was the best man to be Prime Minister by saying that he was the best man to get Brexit done. There wasn't a big pivot where you're saying one thing to the Conservative Party members and then saying a completely different thing to the public as a whole. This is going to be different for Liz Truss, because actually, I mean, if you go back and listen to a lot of those hustings speeches, there's very little talk, if any talk at all, from her about the NHS. That's the second most important issue to voters out there in the country. We still don't have a fleshed out plan for what she's going to do to tackle the cost of living crisis, to keep people's energy bills down this winter. So ultimately, she's going to have to do a massive pivot over the coming weeks, where she starts talking to voters out there in the country, their problems, their hopes, their dreams, rather than just Conservative Party members. Her ability, I think, her ability to do that is ultimately going to decide whether she ends up getting that honeymoon period. I expect we will see a big pivot. I expect we will see a big fiscal intervention, and that's why I think she'll end up doing all right in the polls. I think the problem for her in the long run is probably going to be that she's made lots of promises during this Tory leadership election, many of which are incredibly expensive, and will she be able to keep all of those promises alongside fixing the cost of living crisis and helping get rid of backlogs in the NHS?
As the world travels towards recession, as the United Kingdom travels towards maybe even 20% inflation, it really is a sort of potentially not the best chalice to be handed, perhaps a slightly poisoned one at this point in time. I suppose that Liz Truss will be wanting to not go for a snap election. What do the polls say in terms of whether the country at large would like there to be something like that?
I'm speaking from memory here, but I'm pretty sure we've had a couple of polls asking that specific question. I think generally, actually, more people say that they do want a general election than don't. Obviously, don't mention that to Brenda in Bristol, but that's because that's driven by the fact that this new Prime Minister doesn't necessarily have a mandate, so should somebody deserve and be allowed to be Prime Minister when they've been voted in by 160,000 Conservative members rather than the country as a whole? If you ask voters out there, they don't think that that's fair, and many of them therefore support an election.